of the vote, 53% of the vote. So this time he's down to 49%. But it wasn't enough of a swing to make a difference in the election. That's the whole point. And so he will be reelected in 2 weeks' time. And to the disappointment of countries like the United States, countries like Israel, countries in the European Union, they don't like the idea of a nationalistic leader of a very important country. He has had relations with Russia. He's been neutral in the war in the Ukraine because he says, well, we want to be a mediator in that war. Lots of trade going to Russia is coming via Turkey. In other words, items that are forbidden to be sold in Russia, they come into Turkey and then he just ships them into Russia. It's a straight path through the Bosporus to the Black Sea, which is here. And on the other side of the Black Sea is Crimea. On the other side of the Black Sea is Russia. So Turkey is a vital transportation hub for goods going into Russia legally or illegally. And so the West is in the main disappointed. Israel for sure is disappointed because Mr. Erdogan has blown either neutral or negative toward Israel, but never positive. And, you know, that's the way things are. People who are consumer of news, people who are small L liberal people will look at a country like Turkey and say, well, how could they possibly vote for this kind of autocrat? And yet, if you look at countries like Poland or you look at Hungary, you look at Russia, if there was an election in Russia today between Putin and an opponent, Putin would win by a landslide. Not even a question of a doubt about that. Or Israel, Mr. Netanyahu managed to win an election despite the relative success of the previous government in passing a budget, in trying to unite the country. And still the voters chose Mr. Netanyahu despite his involvement in court cases, despite his being indicted for 3 separate charges of graft, bribery, and influence peddling. You know, when it comes to people, they vote somehow, I would say, in a way more with choosing their own tribe than making a report card and deciding whether a government has done a good job or not. And that is basically the explanation of these elections. Any comments, questions about it?
Islam has a big part to do with this.
I'm sorry?
Islam has a big part.
Yes, I said, yeah, conservative religious, I said that, yeah, for sure. Mr. Erdogan himself is a religious Muslim. His wife wears a hijab, and he has not only brought the public face of Islam in from the cold, he supported the establishment of religious schools to serve students who were not doing well in the public secular education system, to provide students who are religious an option of sending their children to state-recognized and state-supported religious Muslim schools, where secularism is not taught, where the emphasis is on religion and not on science. And he has tried, and he did uproot teachers teaching in the universities who were too liberal. He arrested so many of them after the attempted coup in 2016. 2016, where are we now? 2023, yeah, 2016. You know, he's changed the public face of Turkey from being a secular democratic republic, which is how it was founded, into a kind of a religious Muslim state. He's been building mosques. I just visited Turkey in October of 2022, and the amount of new mosques that you see built, in cities and in the countryside is just phenomenal. Brand new, beautiful buildings. Who's paying for all of that? It's not supposed to be the state, which is supposed to be religious neutral, but it is the state. And not only that, but he has supported the development of Islam in many places that previously were basically non-religious places. In the Balkans, for example, in Bulgaria, in Romania, in Bosnia, in Macedonia, wherever Muslims are living, these places which were once ruled by the Ottoman Empire have seen a big inflow of Turkish money into mosque building. And if you know the architecture of mosques, there's many different styles of mosques, right? But the ones that are being built in those places are built in the Turkish style of mosque construction. So he's really spread out his influence, not only in the Balkans, but as I mentioned last week, in all of the previously Soviet republics like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan. In all of those places, the government of Turkey is trying to act like a big brother and trying to not so much put big money into those countries, which it doesn't have, but to put in cultural influences into those countries, which it does have. And there's a sort of a competition between Turkey, China, and Russia to win over the soul or win over the political support of those countries one by one. And he's been, moderately successful. One of the ways to measure it, for example, is to look at, are these countries abandoning the Russian alphabet in favor of a Latin alphabet? And the answer is yes, they're doing it one by one. And that's really the most evident change that you could see. Now, not only, this abandonment of the Russian alphabet is not only at the behest of Turkey, but it's a kind of way of identifying with the Western world as a whole. And it's has been done and is being changed over in places like Bosnia, in places like Macedonia, in places like Montenegro, where even in Uzbekistan, where I visited, you could see signs written in both the Cyrillic alphabet and in the Latin alphabet, at the same time. So he's been relatively successful in that way. And his new policy of kind of trying to make peace in the Middle East is something which appeals to people. Well, one of the issues in this campaign was something I wanted to allude to, in the next chapter, so to speak, is the whole fate of the 3.5 million refugees that have come in to Turkey from Syria. And Syria is located all over here. This part over here is all Syria. And the refugees after the Syrian civil war, this is the coastline over here, and this is Syria over here. And the Syrian refugees just came over the border to get away from the civil war. They were accepted by the Turkish government. They were settled down in towns and in some refugee camps that are close to the Syrian border. The the acceptance of these Syrian refugees was the biggest amount of refugees settled by pretty well any country anywhere in the world, in the last decade. So accepting 3.5 million people is no small feat. Having to provide housing for them, to provide schools for them, to deal with their medical problems in the hospital system was a tremendous step by Turkey. And part of it has to do with this notion of, and maybe an Islamic notion, of accepting guests and helping people when they need help. And there was not a huge opposition in Turkey to allowing these refugees to come in and settle. But the opposition is now growing because they've been sitting there for quite a long time already. And, the expectation may have been that they were going to go back home at some point or other, but they haven't gone back home yet. And now the civil war in Syria started in 2011. So it's now 12 years later, and the refugees are still there. Sometimes these refugees are seen as competitors in the job market. Sometimes they're seen as competitors in the low-cost housing market. There hasn't, and the other thing, which you should know, and which I really discovered on this trip that I took to Turkey, was that there is a very large Arabic-speaking minority living exactly in the same places that the Syrian refugees are coming to settle in. And these people, this Arabic-speaking minority, has always been there. They've been very quiet, they've been very loyal to the government, they haven't really gotten that much involved in politics. But, they're an easy group for the refugees to come and sort of settle into. And so I was really quite surprised to see and hear Arabic being spoken by people in southern Turkey. So the resentment is the same resentment as you see in the United States against the refugees coming over the border now, and who will be coming over the border. These people are not like us. They don't speak our language. They're there to take jobs away from us. And any kind of nationalism and any kind of troubles that develop can easily be blamed on the powerless refugees who, as I said, 3.5 million is not peanuts. The Turkish population is somewhere around 85 million. So 3.5 million is a fairly large percentage of the total population of the country. And when they're all concentrated in one area, it makes it kind of easier for people to point fingers at them and to say, well, why don't they just go back home? And so this is going to be an issue which will grow and grow as the time gets longer that they're in the country. Many of them want to stay in Turkey. Many of them have, of course, kids who are now in school who speak Turkish. The whole issue of should we force them out or should we sort of not force them out is one which is going to challenge the Turkish government, from now until whenever the civil war ends in Syria. They've always been trading, going way back when, they've always been trading between Aleppo here in Syria and the southern part of the country. And, the border is open at this point, and there is trade that does go on between the two countries in a very modest way. But until Syria can get its act together, the people are going to stay put in in Turkey rather than go back to Syria. Any other comments, questions about this election? Yeah. Yes, right here.
Were you ever in the Kurdish area?
Did I go to the
Yeah.
Kurdish area?
Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly where I went.
Okay.
On the trip that I took this time, it was all from here, 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 and up there. It was a wonderful trip going all the way along in the Kurdish part of the country. And one of the things that was really quite noticeable to me, especially for somebody who comes from here, you know, from Montreal, from Quebec, and you look at flags all the time and you say, okay, you know, by looking at the flags, can I tell anything about the people living there? And if you, in general, Turkey is a very nationalist country, and the people who are Turks are extremely proud of being Turkish. And if you go anywhere in Istanbul, you'll see a Turkish flag on every house. You know, it's like, you know, in the bad old days in Quebec here, you had fleur-de-lis all over the place. But interestingly enough, when you go into the Kurdish parts of the country, the more in you go, the fewer Turkish flags you see. And it's so noticeable because you can come into a town and not see a single Turkish flag. And, you know, there are many countries in the world that I've been to, like the United States, where they love putting flags up all over the place. Another place, of course, is Quebec, where you see, you know, our flags all over the place. Another place I've seen that is in Croatia, where they have Croatian flags all over the place. You know, other countries, you know, like Canada or maybe like Great Britain, you don't see all that many flags. It's not part of their sort of culture to start putting flags on every hill and on, you know, on every riverbank. But in Turkey, that's what they do. Except in the Kurdish areas where they don't. Now there isn't a Kurdish flag that's official. There is one, but you know, if anyone would put that flag up, they'd be in the jail pretty darn fast. And the other thing is that the Kurdish language has been, in the early days of Erdogan, was recognized as a legitimate language on its own, but you didn't see any signs in Kurdish anywhere in the Kurdish areas. So people are just not, they speak it, but they don't put signs up. They don't put commercial signs. I mean, maybe one or two, but really the vast majority of signs were in Turkish. The same thing in this Arabic area, but there were more Arabic signs down in the southern part of Turkey that we visited than there were Kurdish signs in the Kurdish part that we visited. So, you know, the country is overwhelmingly Turkish speaking, and even in the Kurdish areas, Turkish is the language of business, Turkish is what's in schools, you know, etc. And the Turkish language and the Kurdish language have no ties to each other whatsoever. They're completely different language families. The Kurdish language is an Indo-European language, the same branch as we are, more closer to Persian than to any other language. And the Turkish language, the Turks came from Central Asia, you know, as I was saying last week, from the 800s on, they moved into Europe. And so their language has no ties whatsoever to the European languages. There's lots of Turkish languages. The Turkish language family is very big, but those languages are all found in Asia. As I was mentioning before, 4 out of the 5 republics, you know, the Stan republics are speaking Turkish languages. And even, you know, Xinjiang in China, the province Xinjiang or Xinjiang, where the Chinese are, you know, pressing very hard on the people and arresting them and putting them in labor camps and re-education camps and all that stuff. But the language that the people, the Uyghurs, speak in China is a Turkish language. So that's how far away from Turkey the Turkish kind of world exists. Yes, oh, yes.
Do the Turk and the Kurds get along pretty well?
Do they get along? Well, not really. Not really in the sense that, all right, let me just, then we'll make a different map. Well, that's what we're gonna do.
You got Kurds in Syria.
That's what we're doing.
The Kurds are also-
So here's the east part of Turkey. And Turkey is bordered by Armenia over here, by Georgia over here, by Iran, Iraq. This is Iraq over here. This is Iran over here. So we'll call this Iran, Iraq, Syria, what else we got here? Armenia and Azerbaijan. So these are all the countries that are around Turkey. This is Turkey here. So at the end of the First World War, the Ottoman Empire controlled everything up to here, like this. And the Kurds were living a little bit here, all over here, all over eastern Syria, completely over northern Iraq, and all over this area over here in western Iran. So this whole area was populated by Kurds and still is after the First World War. So the Kurds were the largest people at the end of the war who did not get a country. So, you know, Poland was recreated, Czechoslovakia was recreated, Hungary was recreated, all the Yugoslav republics were created out of the ashes of the First World War. And the only people who did not get a country were the Kurds. And Woodrow Wilson, who was the American president at the time, was asked about it. And he said, well, you know, you're dividing everything up, but how about the Kurds? How come they won't get their own country? And he said, well, they should, but it's too complicated. And that's what happened. So they were divided up among all these different places, but the biggest population was in Turkey. That's the biggest population. So more than half of, I think there were about 40 million at the time. And somewhere around 25 million were in Turkey, and the other 15 million are scattered out, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. And a few little dribbles in Azerbaijan, and a few little dribbles in Armenia. So that's how it was. When Turkey was established as a republic after the First World War, as I explained last time, the Kemal Ataturk, who founded the Turkish Republic, he did not want to have a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi-linguistic country. He wanted a country that was 100% Turkish, and that's what he proclaimed Turkey was. So the Kurds who resented this, who rebelled against him in the 1920s, shortly after the state was created, they were defeated in a civil war. It didn't last long, but they were defeated. Kurdish was not recognized as, the Kurds weren't recognized as a people. Kurdish wasn't recognized as a language. And the people were told, you know, get with the plan or too bad for you. He also established a secular republic, like I said last time, so non-religious. The Kurds were the most religious of all the different ethnic groups in Turkey. The Kurds were the most conservative Muslims. and he forced them to comply with the secular laws. In other words, women were not allowed to wear hijabs, men weren't allowed to wear fezes. You couldn't go to school if you were going to wear a hijab, etc., etc. He did also proclaim the equality of men and women in a society where women were really second class in Kurdish society and in all conservative Muslim societies, as you all know, women are not considered to be equals. So he really rubbed the Kurds the wrong way. Let's put it like that. It was really only when Erdogan got into power so many years later, in other words, the Second World War happened, military dictatorships happened, there were liberal democracies for a little bit of time. It was only when Erdogan got into power in his first term did he say, you know, the Kurds need some recognition as a collective society, as a collective group. And he gave it to them. It's just that what happened was that things having not much, well, we'll say this, that there was always an element of militant left-wing Kurdish nationalism, which was really centered in Syria over here. So in this part, remember I said this is Syria here? So a very militant group called the PKK, the Kurdish Workers' Party, they started an armed rebellion in Syria. There were elements in Iraq which were also armed, definitely armed, which were looking to kind of separate out a Kurdish state in northern Iraq. And Mr. Erdogan's fear was that elements of this PKK were infiltrating into the Kurdish parts of Turkey, and that these people would try to create an independent Kurdistan, Kurdish state comprised of parts of Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. So that was his great fear. And the fear was not completely unreasonable, because there were elements that wanted that, but they weren't that strong. In any case, he said anybody who is associated with the PKK is an enemy of Turkey. And there were people in Turkey itself who were associated with that party, except they didn't call it the PKK, they called it something else. He had arrested the leader of the PKK. He had him arrested. He was in Africa, where he was picked up, and I think he was in Kenya or Uganda. He was arrested by Turkish agents, brought back to Turkey, sentenced to life in prison, no, sentenced to death. And then his sentence was commuted to life in prison, and he's still in a Turkish prison to this very day. The political party which the Kurds established, called the HDP, was quite successful, too successful as far as Erdogan was concerned. And so he had the party banned. He had the leader arrested, and you know, at this point, after kind of a rosy honeymoon, the relationship between the Kurds and the Erdogan government is now down, but not out, just down, because he still got votes this election. He still got votes from Kurds in the Kurdish area, especially Kurds who are conservative and religious. So that is the answer to that question. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
What is going on between Turkey and NATO right now?
The question is, what's going on between Turkey and NATO? So Turkey was a founding member of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was set up after the First World War to counter the Soviet Union, to act as a united military alliance in case the Soviets should ever invade. Turkey was so important to NATO because you could see it's right on the border of what was the Soviet Union. So Azerbaijan was in the Soviet Union, Armenia was in the Soviet Union, Georgia was in the Soviet Union. I mean, literally, Turkey was right on the border of the Soviet Union. So obviously, it was very important for NATO to have Turkey as an ally. And Turkey served as a loyal ally because NATO was supplying Turkey with all kinds of weapons. The Turkish military had 500,000 people in it. So it was the largest military in terms of numbers of any country in Europe. They had the largest army. Turkey was part of NATO, and NATO says if one country is attacked, all the other countries have to back it. Now, Turkey also applied to join the European Union. Maybe you're thinking about that as well, I don't know. But Turkey applied to join the European Union a while back. And the European Union was reluctant to admit Turkey into the European Union. Why? Any ideas? Immigration, right. So they didn't want, Turkey had 85 million people in it. It's like the size of Germany, the biggest country in the European Union. If Turkey were to join the European Union, they had free passage for people to go into Europe. And Turkey, of course, is much poorer than the European Union. And it's also, 100% Muslim. And so there was tremendous prejudice against the Turks from pretty well everybody in the European Union saying, we don't want them. And of course, they didn't say that exactly. What they said was, well, Turkey has to change its policies and its laws in order to conform with the liberal model that we have in Europe. But of course, Turkey didn't want to change its laws on press freedoms, on judicial freedoms, on political freedoms, on ethnic and religious freedoms, on freedoms for gays, all those things that Europe stands for. They sort of pushed into Turkey's face and said, well, until you become like us, you can't join us. And at first, Turkey took it as a kind of a blow. But then they said, well, you know what? If you don't want us, we don't want you. And we will then go and form relationships with other places, like I was saying before, with the greater Turkish world to start with, and with other countries in Africa and, other Muslim countries around the world. And we need Europe, but we're not going to come on our hands and knees begging to get in. That was what they were saying. Now, as far as the NATO and the military alliance with NATO, Turkey needed it. The mutual need was more in the past than in the present. We'll put it like that. Turkey definitely, we'll say, broke the agreement that NATO had in 1974. So we're going to go back here. Oh my, look at this. Let's say that this is Cyprus Island over here. Okay, it's close to Turkey. It's only about 80 miles at the shortest part. So Cyprus is an island. This is the coastline of the Mediterranean. So we said this is Syria over here. This is Lebanon over here. This is Israel over here. Israel, Lebanon, Syria. Those are the neighbors of Cyprus. So Cyprus is an island, which was at one time part of the Ottoman Empire. In the 1870s, as part of the weakening of the Ottoman Empire, the British captured it, or the British took it over. The population mix at those days was Cyprus was 80% Greek speaking and 20% Turkish speaking. So it was a predominantly Greek speaking place. And when the British administered it, they put on two very large air bases in Cyprus, which they claimed would be sort of British territory as far as they were concerned. And they administered Cyprus into the 1960s. Now, of course, the question became, if Cyprus became independent, what kind of country would it be? Would it be a Greek country? Would it be a kind of a separate country? What would happen to Cyprus? And because of this ethnic tension between the two communities, Britain kind of held on to Cyprus a lot longer than it held on to other places that it ruled, like Burma or India or those places. An agreement took place to give Cyprus its independence, and the agreement said that Cyprus would remain an independent country, it would remain a neutral country, and that although 80% of the people were Greek, that Greece, that Cyprus would remain an independent country and not join Greece and not join Turkey. That was the essence of the independence agreement that British made, and the Britain would be allowed to keep its two big air bases as kind of, well, not international, but as air bases belonging to Great Britain that Cyprus was not allowed to take over. That was the sort of the agreement that was made. And the first president of the country was Archbishop Makarios, who was a Greek priest, who was also a statesman, a diplomat, and he tried to keep to the essence of this agreement. Now, unfortunately for Cyprus, Makarios had enemies, and his enemies were the Greek nationalists. The Greek nationalists said, look, if Cyprus is 80% Greek, we want to hold a referendum in Cyprus to let the people decide if they want to join Greece as a country or not. And a lot of the Greeks in Cyprus would have wanted to join Greece out of pure fear of Turkey. Because Turkey is a lot closer, like I was saying to you before. This is really true. Greece is like way over that a ways. And, there's a lot of, the map is not 100%, to scale, but, just needless to say, the distance between here and here is way bigger than between here and over here where I'm standing here. There was a coup in Cyprus, and Archbishop Makarios was deposed, and the military generals took over, and they said, we are going to hold a vote to join Greece. That went against the whole constitution of Cyprus, but they said, listen, we're in charge, so we're doing whatever we want. As soon as that coup took place, as soon as news happened that there was this big, what's called enosis, which means joining with Greece. As soon as that happened, guess what happened? The Turks sent in their army to occupy northern Cyprus, 1974. So Cyprus is, let's do a different map. Why try to save paper, right? Sort of Cyprus looks like this, a little bit skinnier, a little bit longer, but pretty well. Like I said, Lebanon is pretty well the closest neighbor that it has, and Turkey is all over here. Now, when I said that the Turkish population was 20% of the island in 1974, it was, but the Turks lived mostly in the cities. So the capital, Nicosia, is here in the middle. The Turks lived a little bit like this here, in this countryside in the north, and they were living in each of the big cities. This was Famagusta, Limassol, the big port, Larnaca, another place. So each of these cities had Turkish minorities living in there. And except for this little area over here, they were a minority all over the place. What the Turkish army did was they came in and they occupied this. This is a little bit bigger, but they occupied this whole territory in the north, right up to Nicosia. And the other big city here is called Paphos, which was not that Turkish occupied. And so that's what happened. They came over in 1972. The army landed. They are still there to this day. The city of Famagusta was right on the border. It was abandoned and is still abandoned. The Turks who were living in these towns over here went to live here. All the Greeks that were living here went to live there. And to this day, this whole northern third of Cyprus has no Greeks in it living in there at all, even though they were the vast majority of people living here before 1974. So that's the situation in Cyprus to this very day. So obviously, this is one NATO power, to go back to your point, one NATO power, Turkey, invaded another NATO power, not invaded, but invaded Cyprus, which wasn't in NATO, but they were counteracting against the Greeks who were in NATO. So imagine you have two NATO allies fighting against each other, and NATO itself did not want to get involved in this fight. They, basically what could they do? That type of thing. So to this day, and then what the Turks did was, the Turks paid Turkish people, poor Turkish people, to come live in northern Cyprus in order to expand the population. Not only did they do that, but they declared that this place here is now called the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. That's the new name of this place. They invented a flag for this place. If I'm not mistaken, there's almost nobody that recognizes this as an independent state, which is what Turkey claims it is, but of course it isn't. So, so they tried to do, they did ethnic cleansing. They got all the Greeks out of here. They got more Turks to come settle into this countryside here, into the place. And to this day, that's the situation. Now, Cyprus is in the European Union now. I think they were in it when the invasion started. So Cyprus is in the European Union. And oddly enough, the southern half of Cyprus really prospered since the Turkish invasion. You'd think that this wouldn't be the case, but they really did. Because they're at the crossroads, because they served as a kind of a black market banking center, insurance center, tourist destination, etc. So the Greek population of Cyprus has prospered quite a lot. The Turkish part, not so much. And that's the situation till today. You might also know that Cyprus is the wedding capital of Israel, because anybody in Israel who's not allowed to or doesn't want to get married with a rabbi, they just fly over to Cyprus. They have wedding palaces, wedding halls. set up for Israelis. It's a whole Israeli wedding industry that takes place here. And the other thing I read about was that Israelis themselves are now coming to live in Cyprus because it's so cheap, it's so secure, it's so nice, it's so close to Israel, and they're setting up businesses and online, all kinds of online stuff going on there, especially in Paphos. There's a whole Israeli community living here now in Paphos. And, so that's the situation as far as, it's one of those called frozen conflicts. A frozen conflict is a conflict which happened, there's a ceasefire, but nothing is there to change what's the original idea. There have been talks between the two sides on reuniting the island, but the moment that a Greek politician says, well, we should reunite the island, then all of the nationalists say, well, how could you possibly do that? You're rewarding the aggressor, because the Greeks are never going to get back their properties or houses that were here, and so to have peace with them means you're recognizing their aggression, and so it's like a frozen conflict. Yeah.
When you go visit Cyprus, you feel that strong army environment? You feel that they come in?
Do you feel that when you go to Cyprus, do you feel a strong army? Yes, there are lots of military in the northern part, and there are military in the southern part. Ironically, I visited Cyprus in 1970 or 71 when it was a united island. I was living in Israel at the time. It was the cheapest place you could go for a holiday. And there was still lots of tension between the Turks and the Greeks even then. And there were Canadian soldiers who were manning the sort of borderline in Nicosia between the two sides. And we spoke to them and just, they were, saying what they were doing, which is basically just sitting and watching. And, there always was tension in that area over there between the two sides. Except that in those days, again, the Turkish side was much poorer than, it was the first place I had ever seen a non-Western toilet, was on the Turkish part of Cyprus. But both sides, both have prospered quite a lot, and the standard of living for the Turkish part of Cyprus is higher than the standard of living for the Turkish state itself, Turkey itself. Yeah.
Just want to return to a comment you made a while back. You said that if there was an election in Russia, Putin would win
Yeah.
overwhelmingly.
Overwhelmingly.
Is that because the Russian people support him, or because he would poison or jail all his opponents?
No, they would win. Putin, so my comment was, and you're going to repeat it again, I said, if a free and fair election were held in Russia, obviously a non-fair election, he would win, of course. But if it was a regular free and fair election, he would still win. Because the vast majority of people in Russia are patriotic. The majority of people in Russia believe Putin's version of whatever is going on in Russia now. I was just reading an article today about how the standard of living in Russia did not fall since this war started, by and large. He has just increased pensions again. He's just added on just now. He increased the wages of people working for the government. He increased pensions. And the people in Russia are not suffering by and large because of this war. The prediction of the downfall of the economy never happened in 2022. So Russia's economy contracted a very small amount. And the estimate by the I think it's the World Bank, I'm not sure, or it might be the International Monetary Fund. One of the world's economic organizations predicted Russia's economy would expand in 2023 by a small amount. And so it's because Russia has such a vast storehouse of natural resources, and it's got huge amounts of money stashed away in banks from all the oil they've been selling, and they're still selling, that the economy has not really been that much affected. And they're very patriotic people. You know, most of them don't want to have a war for sure, but since Putin controls all the media, and since people are not that sophisticated to be able to get Western media, they believe whatever they tell them on television. And so if an election were held, it would be held under the same circumstances as a Turkish election, meaning that all the ads on TV are for Mr. Erdogan. There was nothing for the other guy. And Putin would have an election the same way. Remember, they've had elections in Russia all along. They still, you know, he's won every time, Putin. You know, the elections were fixed. The slates of candidates were manipulated, but there were elections. And if there was a huge outpouring of opposition to Mr. Putin, it would have been felt at the ballot box one way or another. And with certain small exceptions, he's won every region of the country, you know, in the unfair elections that have been held to date. So I really believe he would win by a large amount. You know, the opposition he arrested, Mr. Navalny is in prison. The other guy he killed, I forget what's his name now, Nemtsov, Boris Nemtsov, he killed. So, you know, what opposition would dare stand up to him? Anybody else? Questions, comments? I just want to mention, you know, again, I didn't get to cover nearly all of what I wanted to say, but, you know, I started off with this depressing election result in Turkey, but I want to give you an optimistic election result of an election that was also held this week in Thailand. And in Thailand, there's been military rule in the country now for 10 years. They held an election, a parliamentary election. Oh, by the way, just to go back to this election, there was also a parliamentary election. Out of 600 seats, Mr. Erdogan and his allies only won 317. So his own party did not win half the seats in this election. His own party lost seats, 23 seats, and Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu's party gained another 25 seats. So the results are much closer in the parliamentary elections, but with his ally, with Erdogan's ally, he does manage to have a majority, but not a big one. So, you know, he can't say that the Turkish people have given me an overwhelming vote of support. They've given him a bare majority in parliament and a bare majority in the presidential election. But to go back to Thailand, there was an election that was allowed by the military government. And again, they stack the decks, and again, they manipulate the voting lists, and again, they have a control on the media. But a new opposition party, which has never run before, won more seats than any other party. And when they ally with the normal opposition party, between the two of them, they have a majority in parliament. Now, having a majority in parliament in a democracy means that you could run the country. Having a majority of parliament in a military dictatorship means basically they can arrest all of you and put you all in jail if they want. But it would mean going against the will of the people. And the government, the military dictatorship in Thailand is not really anxious for a fight with all of the people after what was just a democratic election. So there may well be a change in the way Thailand is run, you know, because of the results of this election. They have a two-body parliament. They have a like a House of Commons type assembly and a Senate, and the military controls the Senate, and the elected members vote control the assembly. So it will remain to be seen how these two will get along to run the country. It's going to be an interesting time in Thailand anyway. But the people finally had a choice to express their free will, and they did. And they had a choice to express their free will in Turkey, and they did also. So it wasn't a fixed, a rigged election, as Mr. Trump would say. There weren't ballots that were miscounted or anything else. There were observers there to watch. So he did win, and he does have the support of a half plus a bit of the people, and that's the way it is. As much as liberal West doesn't like it, as much as Israel doesn't like it, that's the way it is, because he has brought huge improvements to the lives of the average person in Turkey. Economic improvements, cultural improvements, religious improvements, and that's what he's being rewarded for. So that's the story. Anybody, how many of you have been to Turkey? Let's get a raise of hands here. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Like about, maybe a third of you have been. For the 2/3 of you who've never been, I will give it my 100% recommendation as a place to visit. The people are so friendly. There's so many interesting things to see and do in the country. Istanbul itself is, of course, a marvel of a city. It was the center of the whole wide world for so long. And being the center of the world for so long, the rulers of Istanbul, the rulers of Constantinople, the rulers of the Ottoman Empire, wherever they went, they stole all kinds of good stuff, and they put it into the museum, which is called the Topkapi Museum. And if you go to that museum, you see, the best of the best of the whole Ottoman Empire. Plus all kinds of historical things with religious significance. A piece of Muhammad's beard, Joseph's staff from the Bible. You can see Abraham's sandals. You can see lots of good stuff that's in there without any DNA, of course, needless to say. But it's a remarkable place, and it's not a place to be afraid of in the least. And it's not expensive, and the food is absolutely amazing. If you like Turkish cuisine, there's nothing better. So it's a wonderful place to visit, and I've been there 4 times, so I could tell you it's really if you want to spend your money on a European vacation, you could spend half and have a vacation in Turkey, and still enjoy yourself. So that's it. Thank you all for listening on Zoom. Thank you all for coming here. I can't express to you how much I enjoy seeing you all in person. That's all I can say. So we'll see you all next week. Thank you.